Hey, everybody. I am Debbie from MadameStitch, and I am here today with Erin of Juniper and Oakes. Hey, Erin.
Hey, Debbie.
And we are here to talk about her square that released today called the Elizabeth Square and the 2024. There it is, Granny Stitch sampler blanket. So excited to have you in the blanket again this year. And you've come up with a fabulous square. But before we get to that, I'm going to make you talk about you. So,
Okay. Talk about my
talk
tables.
about, just tell us a little bit about you, whatever you want to share, particularly about Juniper and Oakes and what anybody who comes to visit you can find, all the facts, all the things.
All right. So my name is Erin. My business is Juniper and Oakes. I love learning interesting stitches and then teaching them to my crochet community, usually in the form of a crochet along. More recently, I've really been getting into mosaic crochet, overlay mosaic crochet, to be specific. And every winter, I host like a winter blanket crochet along, and that's currently active live. Now I'm doing a gingerbread crochet along that uses mosaic crochet, and I think it's beautiful.
It is absolutely gorgeous.
Let me share
I
it with you.
love the colors that you chose for this blanket because they scream holidays. They just scream that deep red and the gold. Oh, it's so gorgeous. Yeah.
I love it. So this crochet along, like this pattern, is free on my website, and just my crochet community is all about it, and we love overlay mosaic crochet. But I also do things like with granny stitch, corner to corner, then different textures like the jasmine stitch and things like that.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I'm just I don't know, undiagnosed ADHD or something where I always got to have something new and fun and like let's learn something new and do something.
You
Um,
know,
but
Erin, I think a lot of us crocheters, especially crochet designers, are a little ADHD because we go, oh, I'm doing this, but that looks like so much fun. Let's do that. We just have so many ideas and so many possibilities that there's just not enough time to do it all, right?
yeah, and I think, our audience, you crocheters out there, are the same way with all your whip
Yeah.
things going on. Because I know more than one of you is doing Debbie's cowl and my gingerbread cowl and, maybe the tranquility cowl, all these
Yeah, there's a whole lot of Cal going on right now. And I find this comment coming up all the time in my Facebook group, and I'm sure you do too, where, I just don't need one more work in progress, but I really want to do this blanket. So
yeah.
there's a whole lot of that going on. So embrace that ADHD. It's great. It's fabulous.
I saw a reel, I don't know if this is true or not, but where was a researcher talking about how you need 5 creative projects to creative people need at least 5 creative projects because you sit down to do one and if you're like I just don't want to look at the granny stitch one more time you know today you're
Well,
just like
that might be you, but
I know I'm just not in the mood today but I'm in the mood to make a gingerbread man or I'm in the mood
yeah.
so it's okay to have more than one project because you might be in
Honestly, I love the fact that research is backing up what I know about myself. I do have to have that many projects going on because whatever I'm in the mood for, quick, mindless, or let's dig in,
right.
I got to have them all.
You need one for Netflix, you need one for a road trip, you need one for just
There
working.
always has to be a travel crochet, right? Because never a wasted moment. All right. Well, we've addressed all the research. Let's get to your square. You've named your square the Elizabeth Square, and it is a fun adaptation of 2 of my favorite stitches, the Granny Stitch and the Moss Stitch. So talk a little bit about how you came up with this combination and the particular design that you came up with.
Sure. So, just like you, some of my favorite stitches to use are the Granny Stitch and the Moss Stitch. I think that they both look really timeless, and then I
Mhm.
when I combine them together, I'm like, this looks really elegant. um, So I named it the Elizabeth Square for 2 reasons, because it did look timeless and elegant and reminded me of Pride and Prejudice and Elizabeth Bennet, so
Mm.
Elizabeth Square. But also my middle name is Elizabeth,
Well, there you go.
and I named my daughter's middle name is Elizabeth, and so I'm like, hey, why not name my Granny Square Elizabeth? Because
Let's do it.
I like to talk about myself. So yeah, so this pattern, you do like 2 rounds of just the traditional granny square, and then if I forget how many, 3 or 4 rounds of the moss stitch, and then back to the granny square again. And so you make 4 individual squares, and then we seam them together at the end using mattress stitch. So I just think that it's also helps ADHD brain, because you're not making, one 12-inch square. You just have 6 inches, and then and then I chose to do 2 in solid colors, and then 2, I just alternated colors every round to come up with that fun little doodad.
Now, one of the fun things that we're finding in the Facebook group is I'm encouraging people, especially with size, to be adaptive when they're making the squares. And one of the ways that I adapted was I did 2 squares in one color and 2 squares in another color. So all 4 of mine are solid,
Yeah, you're right.
but they're not, but they're offset on the diagonal. So it gives, I think what's really cool about your square, the overall square, is that when you adapt those little squares, you can really create a lot of different looks.
Exactly.
So anyone who's attempting your square should really be thinking about color choices for
Mhm.
it, because I think it really lends itself to either be solid, it looks gorgeous in just solid color,
Right?
or multiple colors, right?
Mm.
Mhm.
Yes. I'm okay, because I want to do a blanket of these squares.
Mhm.
And I was just gonna do them in these 2, and now I'm like, oh, I could do yeah,
See, so many ideas.
perfect ideas, because I'm like, you could do all the granny stitches in one stitch, and then the moss stitch in a different color, and alternate
I
that.
mean, the possibilities are endless, and you could do a hodgepodge with, just make it a scrap can. Who knew?
Yeah.
All right, I wanted to talk a little bit about um, some tips that we can give our makers when they make your square. Now, it's a fairly straightforward design, but there
Mhm.
are some intricacies in there that are worth noting. One of them that I could actually talk to you about was the fact that, the typical granny square has a chain 1 space after each granny stitch. And we're talking about the 3 double crochet worked in the same space or stitch, right?
Yeah.
You actually put that in the special stitches. So it's one of those things that in your instructions, that chain 1 space is understood,
Yeah.
right? So we
Yeah,
want to make sure that everyone understands that there is that chain 1 space.
exactly. I don't, and maybe that's my own problem. To me, I'm like, granny stitch is 3 double crochets and a chain 1, and so it's just together. And so I have that in the special stitch section. And so, yeah, did you find? I think you might have pointed that out to me when you're making it. You're like, this is kind of confusing. What am I supposed to do?
Well, no, the reason I pointed it out because I'm the opposite. I do a lot of squares without that chain 1 space because of the way it's either the way I crochet or the yarn that I'm using, whatever the reason.
Sure.
Sometimes I'll leave it out because it just makes the sides a little less wonky, a little more
Okay.
compact,
Yeah,
right? So for my brain, I need to be reminded that that chain 1 space needs to be there. And that's the reason I pointed it out, because
yeah,
we all have different ways of saying stuff, and that's okay.
very true. So when you're following my pattern, it says GS, and that is 3 double crochets and a chain 1. Uh,
Yes, right.
that. And then the same goes for, so the moss stitch is, the section in between, and that is a single crochet and a chain 1. And that I've included in my special stitches as well. So anytime you see, did I put it as MS? I can't remember.
Yes, well, that I want to point out in the corners. Otherwise, it doesn't make any difference. But in the corners, it's really important to remember that the moss stitch includes a chain one after the single crochet, right?
Yes.
Because that plays into how many chain you have in the corners.
Yes.
And that's
So
important.
it is important because my corners are moss stitch chain one. And so if you
Yes.
remember that moss stitch is single crochet chain one,
Right.
and you add a chain one. So it's single
Yes.
crochet chain two, and that's what your corners are.
Yeah, it's if you know that's what's happening, it is not confusing at all. But I'm going to put a slightly different spin on it. Just know that the corner has a chain two space.
Yes.
Part of that is moss stitch. Part of that is the chain that you add afterwards. So I think that's going to be kind of a fine point for some people, because I'll bet that we may get a few comments about my stitch count doesn't work out right. Well, pay attention to the special stitches, and then you'll be fine.
Make things complicated around here.
No, you didn't.
So that rule is the same for the moss stitch and the granny stitch, because granny stitch includes the chain one, and then for the corners you also have a chain one. So chain two space in every corner.
Erin is consistent, so that is a good thing. I love it. All right, now I want to talk a little bit about, gauge. It in most of these squares is not terribly important, but the finished size is, because we're putting together 12 completely different squares to create a blanket, and all of those squares need to be in the same range, right? So we're aiming for 12 and a half inches. How can the maker ensure that making 4 smaller squares gets you to the 12 inches? What's the size?
Great question. So your smaller squares need to be 6 inches.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you'll have 2 next to each other, added together equals 12. So really, no matter what your size is, if you crochet really tight and then your squares end up being 10 inches total, you want to have 5-inch squares. So just make sure it's just half of whatever you're doing.
Yes. Now, I noticed that your square has a really nice even edge over the seam, over where the seam would be. You didn't do, right at the very edge where your where your hand is, right?
Yep.
Did you do a round of single crochet around yours, or is it just you've just managed to do a mattress stitch?
No, I've done single crochet around it.
Okay. So we're just going to remind everybody that at the end of the square, they're going to put a round of single crochet around, which is something that I've been encouraging for every square, regardless of what the instructions say. Just it makes it more uniform to put those squares together at the end. Yeah. Definitely. Cool. All right. Do you have, Ms. Erin, do you have any more tips or tricks for our makers before we call it a day?
Well, I do have a YouTube video for those of you who love videos on how to work up the square. I think I do it in the solid color. So when you're working yours up, you can follow that tutorial on my YouTube. And that's included in the free pattern on my website. And also, if you buy the ebook, I've linked that as well.
Yes, I think I see there's a link in the pattern for that as well. Yep. So we're good. All right. That's good to know. All right. Well, Ms. Erin, I can't thank you enough for being a part of this fabulous blanket. I love doing this every year because I love doing stuff with my friends. And every time you make something for the blanket, it's just so creative and beautiful. So I'm so happy to have you a part of the blanket this year.
Well, thanks, Stephanie.
And Erin, I want to thank you for sharing all this stuff with our makers, because they really do appreciate it. They watch and they get little tips and tricks, and they love seeing the faces behind the designs, right?
Yeah. We're real people. We're real quirky people.
We are real quirky people, and we love what we do, and we love sharing it with everybody. I want to remind everybody who's watching this to make sure that they visit your website, which is juniperandoakes.com, because you've got lots of fabulous designs and things coming up and projects, and you just have all the things. So
Yeah.
they need to check you out.
You do. You can find me at Juniper Oakes at all the places. And just remember there's an ES at the end. Juniper Oakes.
Yes, is OAKES. So make sure that you use that. Otherwise, I don't know where you're going to end up, but certainly not with Erin. Oh my goodness. It's been such a pleasure to be with you today. And I'm so happy that we have this square in the blanket. I said all of that already, so I'm just going to call it a day. And say happy crocheting to everybody.
Happy
Thanks,
crocheting.
everybody.